Hello, Brubs. We're back with the Memoirs of Bridget Hitler, edited by Michael Unger. It's a 1979 book by, obviously, Bridget Hitler, the sister-in-law, half sister-in-law of Adolf Hitler. 11. Notwithstanding the fatigue and apprehension I felt when I went to bed in Adolf's house, I woke early, refreshed, and I do not deny it, full of curiosity. As soon as I was dressed, I went out on the veranda. This was a wide open porch which encircled the entire second floor. There was a great deal of cooing. The hell is cooing and chirping going on, and I soon discovered the cause of it. A bird cote was securely fixed to a pole on the side of the house. Several varieties of birds were fluttering around in the carefree way of birds anywhere in the world. The view was breathtakingly beautiful. The lonely slopes of living green sank serenely, intersected by the brown ribbon of road we had traversed the night before. To right and left, the majestic Austrian Bavarian Alps swelled in great undulations, extended into infinity. Behind the house, the mountain, out of which the location had been scooped, towered in rugged grandeur. A lawn was laid down on the flat surface surrounding the house. Oh man, I'm going to sneeze again. In the middle of the garden, a telescope mounted on a tripod pointed bless me towards the most remote visible peaks. Across the lawn was a second house for the accommodation of Adolf's special bodyguards. And what's this say? Hitler's Berghof and the view towards Austria. Kind of boring, honestly. Sprinkled everywhere were low-growing flowers of a sprightly hue. I learned later that they were cyclamens, which exuded a delicate but insistent fragrance. I drew in deep breaths of the invigorating air. It was a heavenly morning. I went downstairs as soon as my watch, as well as my appetite, indicated that it was breakfast time. Pat and Angela were there ahead of time. I can't read. I went downstairs as soon as my watch, as well as my appetite, indicated that it was breakfast time. Pat and Angela were there ahead of me. Angela and I were served boiled eggs, coffee, rolls, and marmalade. Pat, however, had bacon and eggs, either because Angela knew his preference or because of the usual distinction between men and women, which in Germany extends even in such minutiae. Adolf did not appear. It's about Bridget Hitler, sister in law of Adolf Hitler, who wrote a memoir. It is a lazy day, Faulen Zertag, Angela informed me, and then explained Adolf will often remain in bed until noon if he has an interesting book to finish. On such days, his breakfast is brought in on a tray, and no one is allowed to disturb him. I asked her if it was true that he never drinks alcohol, and she replied that it was so. For Mittagessen lunch, Adolf usually has fish or eggs, though guests are frequently served meat. He loves salad. At breakfast, he has 2 eggs in a cup, Schwarzbrot, black bread, and butter with cream cheese and marmalade, and 1.5 pints of milk. He particularly likes dessert, which is always served. Fruit pastry with whipped cream or creme cream. Is that creme or is that cream? Creme caramel and souffle with whipped cream are frequent dishes. And what does he read? I asked. Angela smiled indulgently. Of course, he wouldn't like it to be generally known, because everyone thinks he reads only serious work, but he prefers detective or adventure stories. You know, a great man needs distraction, and when he gets started on a good one, he can't put it down until he's finished the last page. The Berghoff lawn with telescope in position. Where's the telescope? Spot the telescope. I don't see it. Oh, there it is right there. I learned from Angela that one of Berlin's well known publishers of thrillers tactfully stopped the series when the Nazis took over, thinking it unlikely that such books would be welcomed by the Third Reich. It was not long, however, before he was turning out more than before. Far from rejecting them, Adolf had let it be known that this was his wish. Adolf's interest is strictly limited to German books, as he still doesn't read any foreign languages. I think he will not be so late today, Angela continued, because he went to bed early last night. It's only when he's had a trying day that he needs to be alone. Sometimes, she added, he spends the whole day at the movies. He's changed one of the rooms into a studio. When the new house is built, he will have a special room made that will be marble. Another interesting detail furnished by Angela is that just as Adolf receives a copy of every new book, so every new film is shown to him here. English, Italian, and American pictures are presented as well as German, usually made more understandable by German subtitles. His private cinema is equipped with the most modern sound apparatus. An excellent operator is always available. There is a bell in each of Adolf's hands, so he can see repeats of sequences he specially enjoys. Adolf is a film fan of long standing, Angela told us, even when he's still a struggling political agitator. When he was still a struggling political agitator, he spent many evenings in the Munich and later Berlin picture house. Says, if he liked a film especially, he saw it about twice or even 3 times, often on gloomy winter days when time lagged heavily on his hands. He would go from one movie to another. It was not at all unusual for him to witness 3 full-length programs before the theaters closed. But nowadays, Angela concluded, my brother is forced to limit his movie orgies somewhat, for his eyes are none too good, and he must avoid overtiring them. Pat and I decided to walk down to the village. As Angela accompanied us to the door, we encountered a man about 40 who was heading towards the stairs leading to the second floor. When he saw Angela, he greeted her with great courtesy, addressing her as Madame Angela. Or is that Madam? I guess that's Madame Angela. He was Adolph's hairdresser. Adu was the typical barber, loquacious and amiable. Pat had heard a lot about him and told me Adolf had been shaved by him ever since Ado worked in the Berlin Kurfürstenhof, Adolf's headquarters before he became chancellor. Later, Adu was promoted to the part of court barber. Though Adolf changed, Adu did not. He is the only man who dares joke with Adolf, telling him the same atrocious puns he used to offer his regular customers. He is the most modern equivalent of a court jester. He is allowed to say anything. He collects and tells jokes against his master. He is an amusing fool and a dangerous man. Adu has his own connections and has gradually wormed his way into an important place in Adolf's entourage, with a single joke that could break careers and ruin men. As Adu mounted the stairs, Angela looked after him rather angrily. It was not, however, until he was out of sight that she spoke. Adu has his nose in everything and repeats all he knows to Adolf. There is no household detail too trivial for him to make something out of. You know how it is, Bridget. When you keep house for any man, there are always many little matters you don't mention to him. But Adu does. The swine. He even told Adolf I was helping Hermann Goring swindle land from a peasant here. Adolf was furious, thinking he might have Goring for a neighbor. So furious that he made things very difficult for me. Leaving Angela, we went outside. Crossing the open porch, we saw tables and chairs had been set out in front of the big dining room kitchen window. Probably they had been there before, but I hadn't noticed them in the dark. After we passed the iron gate with its bars and guards, the road wandered pleasantly down to the village. It was Sunday, and the melodious ringing church bells invited us to a picturesque Catholic church with a minaret belfry, which shared the most important part of the main street, with 3 or 4 imposing hotels for tourists. Seated on the sidewalk was an artist making sketches. Inside the church, the villagers sat, dressed in Sunday garb. The women wore less interesting black dresses and aprons. The men wore short breeches and woolen stockings, which came in 2 parts, with their bare legs showing between. Many wore flat black hats decorated with gold cord and 2 tassels. Some had much fancier headgear trimmed with feathers. Halfway through the service, as though at a prearranged signal, the congregation rose in a body and melted through the doors. Pat and I were nearly the only ones left in the church. When we reached the street, it was empty. There were none of the gossiping, hand-shaking groups so familiar on American Sunday mornings. I looked at Pat questioningly. Nazis, he replied simply, as though that explained everything, but went on when he saw I didn't understand. They don't approve of the people attending Mass and will do anything to break it up. We went back up the mountain, on a kind of tramway. After a cursory inspection by the guards at the gate, we were astonished to see people clustering in front of the house, from time to time shouting in chorus, "We want to see our Führer! We want to see our Führer!" For a moment I wondered how it was possible that they should have so much freedom when he had been so strictly examined. "Official," Pat said. "Adu told me. They're hand-picked by Bruckner. Adolf has to be feted. I don't understand. It's simple enough, I suppose. Adolf must have applause, just as someone has to drink, so he has to be worshipped. It's the one thing he has to have." As we stood there, a murmur shimmered through the crowd. No autographs today, and then a diseased, and then a displaced but he'd been to the window several times. Would he come again? Apparently not. Finally, the group broke up and wandered off unobtrusively, shepherded towards the main gate by the armed guards. We watched them leave. As we were about to go into the house, a stumbling young guard came hurriedly towards me, bringing a message from the Führer that he would like to have a talk with me in the garden where he was walking his dogs. There's a crowd awaits for the Führer. His Mercedes can be seen. Where is it? Is that it? I don't see it. Where's the damn Mercedes? Find the Mercedes. Pat looked at me as though to say, "Be careful, mother." I turned to the path which led between the two houses into the garden. I saw my brother in law dressed in the costume of a Bavarian mountain dweller, which consisted of short knickers which left his knees bare, heavy white stockings, a gray woolen jacket, and a green cap. He was greatly changed. When I had last seen him, he was poorly dressed and groomed. Now he had put on weight and was very well groomed. I thought suddenly of a petit bourgeois who had won first prize in the sweepstakes and come into possession of everything he'd formerly lacked. There he is, Charlie Chaplin's brother Adolf. I then walked towards him. He was holding up the heavy whip for three magnificent German shepherds to jump up, watching him as intently as I could. Without it being too noticeable, I dubiously considered the indisputable fact that my son's and my own life were in the hands of this man who was so studiously not seeing me. I kept recalling over and over again his last words as the train pulled out with him from Lime Street Station in Liverpool. You'll get everything that's coming to you. Now he had his chance to pay everything back with interest. It is difficult to deceive a woman. She can always tell when a man is posing. Adolf was a born actor who played even for a one person audience. I saw this clearly as he stood there, letting me come to him. When I was only a few yards away, he ordered the dogs to lie down. One lay at each foot, ears pricked and tails wagging as I approached. Adolf touched them with the whip to make them stop. This made it necessary for him to offer me his left hand, as the right was occupied with holding the whip. I hope you are enjoying your visit and are having a good time. He clapped my hand in his and looked at me for a long time. The years have passed over your head without touching you, he said at last. This was his only allusion to his Liverpool visit. Naturally, I didn't comment. Adolf spoke to the dogs, who eagerly got to their feet, and we began to talk. Adolf presented them to me by name: Blondie, Mac, and Wolf. Wolf, Blondie, his favorite, was later in intelligent response. What? Was later poisoned, pardon. Blondie, his favorite, was later poisoned. He seemed to take great pleasure in their intelligent response to his commands. They understood every inflection of his voice and obeyed like good soldiers. It was interesting to note that he posed for the dogs almost as much for me, and equally enjoyed the success with them. They obviously liked him, but dogs, unlike some men, are happy in a state of subservience. There were innumerable subjects one might have discussed with Adolf, and 1,000 questions I might have asked, but I didn't want to sound like a reporter, so I confined myself to uncontroversial subjects. One of the questions I asked, perhaps idiotically, is of wide interest, so I shall include it here. Why have you never married? For a tense moment, I thought I had made a faux pas. Perhaps Adolf was touchy on the subject. Perhaps his experience with Geely had given him a complex about women. Perhaps my clumsiness was like salt on a raw wound. Do not be embarrassed, Bridget, he said, and his morbid mask assumed a droll but shrewd smile. You are not the first to ask me that question, and I shall tell you if you are interested. It is a question of statistics. You see, there are approximately 20 million women in Germany, and all of them are more or less attached to me. Then, in the Hitler made battalions, there are approximately 20 million girls being brought up as mine. 20 million women plus 20 million girls equals 40 million Germans. If I were to marry one of these women today, I'd lose the personal interest of 39,999,999. Tomorrow. 999, he repeated boisterously. I cannot afford to do it. When I laughed, he joined in, obviously greatly pleased with himself. No woman in Germany must ever be entitled to exclusive possession of me, he went on, as though taking me into his most intimate confidence. They are charming, the ladies. His tone implied that he and I were worldly friends who could discuss such a matter with safe objectivity. To love them is a privilege and a pleasure, but to love them too much might prove a pain and a penalty for a man in my position. He smiled at me in as nearly natural a way as it is possible for a man who never forgets he must create an impression, even in the relaxation of his own home. Mein Gott, he exclaimed, as though it had just come to him as a great surprise. I myself cannot explain it, but the women are mad about me. They all love me, and I assure you I do nothing, absolutely nothing, to encourage that sort of thing. He leaned closer. Can you believe, Bridget, that there are women in Germany who would not wash their hands for a whole week after shaking hands with me? They say they cannot bear to wash off their Fuhrer's handshake. He grinned engagingly. No, I said, not really. Yes, he insisted. Mein Gott, yes. And he paused dramatically. Goring tells me that when they do wash their hands, these women, they put the water in a bottle and keep it to show their friends. This is really amazing, I commented. Adolf let his arms fly in the air as he laughed merrily. They're crazy, he said with great satisfaction. But of course, I am glad to have them feel that way about me. His enjoyment was jovial but smug. I thought of the matinee idols I had known during my stage career. They too measured their success by the idiocy of their admirers. I understand you expressed the desire to settle in our country. He changed the subject. I am pleased to hear it. There is no obstacle to that. As I stood there, a step or two away from him, a thought struck me like a physical blow. Adolf also knew of my conversation with Eloise. I had said one word to Eloise at his restaurant. A few days later, the Chancellor's secretary had a dossier on me. And now the Chancellor was discussing it with me as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Adolf had begun a discourse on the merits of Germany. Suddenly, he interrupted himself in the middle of a sentence, or word rather, and excusing himself, said in an apologetic tone, but you will realize all that for yourself when you become more intimately acquainted with the conditions here in Germany. We started to walk again. Adolf called his dogs, which, tiring of the long pause, had strayed some distance away. Angela told me you would like to meet Paula. I would be very grateful to you, Bridget, if you could persuade her to come and visit us. Bridget, if you could persuade her to come visit us. Oh, I already said that. He paused. She is afraid of me and angry. She doesn't want to understand that she is making herself ridiculous. And me too. Please, Bridget, when you see her, tell her there is room for her here. She could be happy, and if she doesn't want to speak to me, she needn't worry that I would force my company on her. Ich hab ein Neben Neben Nebenbeschäftigung. Ach, I have a second occupation too. I go to Berlin sometimes. Oh, there goes that. Paula could be almost alone here. Is that right? That seems like I go to Berlin sometimes. Paula could be almost alone here. Or I will build a house for her. I am planning to make changes here. If she once came, I'm sure she'd decide to stay. Do you think you could convince her? I understand she has asked you to meet her at Salzburg tomorrow. I will arrange for you to meet her there. He stopped walking and looked thoughtfully as he said, "Ah, if I could only speak with her and tell her myself, but perhaps you can do it for me." He glanced at the dogs. They were regarding him with great eagerness to be off on what they considered the proper business of the outing. "I must run a little with my dogs. Perhaps it would be better if you returned now." He smiled graciously and accompanied me back to the point, from which we started talking of Paula and how absurd she was. He repeated what I had already heard from Angela, that Paula was thinking of writing a book. I wanted to ask him to let Pat accompany me, but he was already bidding me a courteous farewell. Whistling to the dogs, he turned into a rock strewn path overgrown with weeds and coarse grass. Maybe I should wait even later every night when I'm basically sleeping. All right, that's all. Goodbye, bros. Guten Abend.